The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds across the midnight skyline, each one a testament to wealth, power, and dreams built on empires that never sleep. But tonight, in one of those towering fortresses of glass and steel, a different kind of empire was about to crumble. Daniel Harrington's footsteps echoed through the marble hallways of his estate, a palace worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. The sound of his Italian leather shoes against polished stone was the only noise in the vast silence. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not tonight. Not for another 3 days. His business trip to Singapore had ended abruptly when the deal closed faster than anticipated. He'd caught the first flight home, eager to surprise the woman he loved, the woman who had become his entire world. Naomi Carter. His fiancée. The one person who made all the money, all the power, all the success actually mean something. But as Daniel moved deeper into his home, something felt wrong. The lights were on in the guest wing, the section of the estate that Naomi had claimed months ago for what she called her private workspace. She rarely went there when he was around. It had always struck him as odd, but he'd trusted her. Trusted her completely. Now, as he approached those doors, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Laughter. A child's laughter. His brow furrowed. Naomi didn't have nieces or nephews. She'd never mentioned babysitting. They'd never discussed children, not yet anyway. That conversation was supposed to come after the wedding. Daniel's hand reached for the door handle, his heart beginning to pound in a way it never did in boardrooms or during million-dollar negotiations. This was different. This was personal. This was his life. He pushed the door open. And the world as Daniel Harrington knew it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. There, in the middle of the room, surrounded by scattered toys and coloring books, sat Naomi Carter. Her mahogany skin glowed under the soft lamplight, her natural curls pulled back from her face. But it wasn't Naomi who made Daniel freeze in the doorway. It was the boy. A child, maybe 5 years old, with sandy brown curls and a smile that faltered the moment he noticed the stranger in the doorway. But it was the eyes that Daniel couldn't look away from. Piercing blue eyes. The exact shade of his own. The same eyes that stared back at him every morning in the mirror. The child's small arms were wrapped around Naomi's waist, and as Daniel stood there, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to process what he was seeing, the boy buried his face into Naomi's side. Naomi's head snapped up. Her eyes, those deep brown eyes that Daniel had fallen in love with, went wide with terror. The color drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, barely above a whisper, she managed to speak. "Daniel, I can explain." But her voice cracked. Tears were already streaming down her beautiful face, cutting tracks through her composure like cracks in a dam about to break. Daniel couldn't move. Couldn't speak. His mind was racing through every possibility, every explanation, but none of them made sense. None of them could explain why there was a child, a boy who looked exactly like him, hiding in his home. Some secrets, you see, don't need explanation. Some truths are so undeniable that words become meaningless. They stand before you, living and breathing, impossible to ignore and impossible to unknow. And in that moment, as Daniel Harrington stared at the two people in that room, he knew with absolute certainty that his carefully constructed life had just been built on a foundation of lies. But before we uncover the devastating truth behind what Daniel just walked into, before we peel back the layers of this secret that's been hidden for years, let me take a moment to greet everyone who's here with us right now. May God's grace and blessings overflow in your life today and always. If you're going through struggles right now, if you're carrying secrets that weigh heavy on your heart, or if you're trying to rebuild trust that's been broken, I pray this story reminds you that truth always finds its way to light. And love, real genuine love, can survive even the deepest betrayals if both people are willing to fight for it. Now, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this right now, if you're here for this journey, type the word present in the comments below. Let me see who's part of our family. This is our ritual, and I want to know you're riding this emotional roller coaster with me. And listen, if you haven't subscribed to Mr. Harrington Stories yet, what are you waiting for? Every single week, I bring you the most dramatic, the most emotional, the most jaw-dropping billionaire romance and family drama stories you won't find anywhere else. These aren't just stories, they're experiences. They're journeys into the lives of people who have everything money can buy but are still searching for the one thing it can't, real love. So hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on those notifications. Because trust me when I say you don't want to miss what happens next in this story. What you're about to hear will shock you, break your heart, and maybe, just maybe, restore your faith in second chances. Now, let's go back to that room. Let's uncover the truth behind Naomi's secret. Let's discover how a billionaire who thought he had everything is about to learn he's been living a lie. The woman standing in that doorway, trembling with fear and regret, wasn't always the polished fiancée of a billionaire. Naomi Carter's story began in a place far removed from marble hallways and diamond chandeliers. It began in the cramped corridors of a Brooklyn apartment building where the elevator never worked and the walls were so thin you could hear your neighbors' arguments like they were happening in your own living room. Naomi Carter was born into struggle. Her mother, Gloria Carter, was a force of nature, a woman who worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. Gloria cleaned office buildings before dawn, worked the lunch shift at a diner in Midtown, and stocked shelves at a grocery store until midnight. Naomi barely saw her mother during those years, but she understood something crucial from watching Gloria sacrifice everything. Hard work was the only currency that mattered when you were born with nothing. Naomi's mahogany skin would glow under the streetlights as she walked home from her own late shifts, working her way through community college. She waitressed at diners, shelved books at the public library, took any job that would hire her and let her study during the quiet hours. She was brilliant, the kind of intelligence that couldn't be taught, the kind that made professors stop and take notice. Sharp, ambitious, relentless. By the time Naomi was 24 years old, she had clawed her way out of Brooklyn and into one of the most prestigious internship programs in the country. Harrington Global, a financial empire that stretched across continents, a company so powerful that entire economies shifted when they made a move. Getting that internship wasn't luck, it was years of perfect grades, flawless interviews, and a determination that refused to accept no as an answer. She walked into those towering glass offices on her first day wearing a suit she'd saved 6 months to afford, her natural hair pulled back in a sleek bun, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. This was it. This was her chance to prove that she belonged in rooms where people like her were rarely invited. And then she saw him. Daniel Harrington stood at the head of a conference table on the 47th floor, his presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with his 6'2" frame. He was everything Naomi wasn't, born into wealth so old it had its own Wikipedia page, raised in a world where power was inherited like eye color. His tailored suit probably cost more than Naomi's entire year of rent. His voice carried the kind of authority that made grown men straighten their spines. But when their eyes met across that conference table during her first week, something shifted in the air. Daniel Harrington had been raised to see people as assets or liabilities, as useful connections or potential threats. Women, in particular, had always approached him with calculated smiles and rehearsed charm, their interest transparently tied to his last name and his bank account. He'd learned to read those games from a young age, learned to keep everyone at arm's length. But Naomi Carter didn't look at him like he was a walking investment opportunity. She looked at him like he was just a man. And for Daniel, who had spent his entire life suffocating under the weight of expectations, that was intoxicating. For Naomi, Daniel represented everything she'd been taught to be wary of: privilege, power, the kind of wealth that made people forget other people were human. But beneath the billion-dollar suits and the commanding presence, she saw something that surprised her. Loneliness. The kind of isolation that comes from being surrounded by people who only want something from you. Their affair began quietly, almost accidentally. Late nights working on a project turned into conversations that had nothing to do with business. Daniel would find excuses to stop by her desk. Naomi would linger after meetings, hoping for a few more minutes in his presence. The attraction between them was magnetic, dangerous, absolutely forbidden. She was an intern. He was the CEO. The power imbalance was impossible to ignore, but the chemistry between them was volcanic. It started with stolen glances and brushed hands. Then came the night Daniel asked her to stay late to review a presentation, and when the last employee left the floor, he'd finally closed the distance between them and kissed her with a desperation that took her breath away. Naomi knew it was wrong, knew it was risky, but in that moment, she didn't care. For 6 months, they existed in a secret world. Late nights in his penthouse office where the city lights stretched out below them like scattered stars. Stolen weekends at private estates where no one knew their names. Hotel rooms in cities where nobody would recognize Daniel Harrington's face. In those hidden moments, titles didn't matter. His billions were irrelevant. They were just Daniel and Naomi, two people who made each other feel less alone. Naomi had never felt anything like it. Daniel was attentive, passionate, surprisingly vulnerable when they were alone. He told her things he'd never told anyone, about the pressure of living up to his father's legacy, about feeling like a prisoner in his own life, about wondering if anyone would ever love him for who he was rather than what he represented. And Naomi, despite every warning bell in her head, fell completely in love with him. But secrets in the world of billionaires don't stay buried. They fester. They grow. And eventually, they explode. The end came swiftly and without warning, like a car crash you see coming but can't avoid. Richard Harrington discovered the affair on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Daniel's father was a man who had built an empire through ruthlessness and an unwavering commitment to the family legacy. He had not raised his son to be distracted by inappropriate relationships with employees, especially not with an intern who brought nothing to the table, no connections, no family name, no wealth to merge with theirs. Richard didn't confront Daniel first. That would have been inefficient. Instead, he summoned Naomi to his private office on the building's executive floor, a place she'd never been invited before. The office was all dark wood and leather, the kind of room designed to intimidate. Richard sat behind his massive desk, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression carved from ice. He didn't offer her a seat. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice carrying the same authority as his son's but without any of the warmth. "I'll make this brief because I don't believe in wasting time. You will end whatever inappropriate relationship you have with my son. Immediately." Naomi's hands trembled, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington." "I'm not asking for your respect," Richard interrupted, sliding a manila envelope across the desk. "I'm giving you an opportunity to leave with your dignity intact." Naomi's fingers shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $500,000 and a non-disclosure agreement that spanned dozens of pages. "You will leave my son's life," Richard said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "You will never contact him again. You will sign that agreement, take that check, and disappear. In return, I won't destroy your career before it even begins. I won't make sure you're unhireable in every major city in this country. I won't ruin your mother's employment situation." The threat against her mother made Naomi's blood run cold. Gloria had finally gotten a stable job with benefits. She couldn't lose that. "And if I refuse?" Naomi asked, though her voice barely carried. Richard smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Then you'll discover exactly how far my reach extends. You're a smart girl, Naomi. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Naomi wanted to fight. Every instinct screamed at her to tear up that check, to march straight to Daniel's office and tell him what his father had done. To demand that Daniel choose her, stand up for what they had, prove that their relationship meant something. She left Richard's office with the envelope burning in her hands and went straight to the executive wing. But when she reached Daniel's assistant, the woman gave her a sympathetic look that made Naomi's stomach drop. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," the assistant said quietly. "Mr. Harrington left for Europe this morning. He'll be gone indefinitely. He didn't leave any information about when he'd return. Naomi stood there, frozen. Daniel had left. Without a word. Without saying goodbye. Without even texting her. Had he known? Had his father told him about the confrontation? Or had Daniel simply decided their secret affair was too complicated, too risky, too beneath him? Standing in that hallway, clutching an envelope filled with hush money, Naomi Carter felt like the biggest fool in the world. She'd actually believed a billionaire could love someone like her. She'd actually thought their connection was real. She took the money. She signed the agreement. And she disappeared from Daniel Harrington's world like she'd never existed at all. 2 months later, Naomi sat on the bathroom floor of her studio apartment, staring at a plastic stick that would change her life forever. Pregnant. The word seemed impossible. She and Daniel had been careful, or so she thought. But clearly not careful enough. And now, as she sat there with her back against the cold bathroom wall, her entire future unraveled before her eyes. Her first instinct was to call him. To demand he take responsibility. To tell him that his father's money hadn't made her disappear, it had just made her angrier. But then she remembered Daniel boarding that plane without a word. She remembered the way he'd left her standing in that hallway like she meant nothing. And she remembered Richard Harrington's cold eyes as he threatened to destroy not just her, but her mother too. What would happen if she told Daniel about the baby? Would he believe her, or would his father convince him she was just another woman trying to trap a billionaire? Would Richard make good on his threats and ruin Gloria's life? Would Naomi become a tabloid headline, gold digger in turn claims CEO's baby, while lawyers buried her under legal motions she couldn't afford to fight? Naomi made a decision that night, sitting on that bathroom floor with tears streaming down her face. A decision that would haunt her for the next 5 years. She would raise this child alone. She would disappear completely from Daniel Harrington's world. She would build her own life, create her own success, and never look back. And that's exactly what she did. The pregnancy was hard, morning sickness that lasted all day, working 2 jobs because the money from Richard wouldn't last forever, and she refused to touch it anyway, out of pride. Naomi moved to a different neighborhood, changed her phone number, deleted every social media account. She made herself invisible. When Elijah Carter was born on a cold February morning, Naomi held him in her arms and made a promise. She would give him everything. Love, stability, opportunity. He would never know poverty the way she had. He would never feel less than anyone else. And he would never ever know that his father was a man who had abandoned them both. For 5 years, Naomi kept that promise. She rebuilt herself from the ground up. She took a job in marketing at a smaller firm, worked her way up through sheer determination and talent. She rented a modest apartment in a good school district. She raised Elijah to be kind, curious, bright. Every night, she would tuck him into bed and kiss his forehead, and every night she would see Daniel Harrington in her son's piercing blue eyes. But she never told him. How could she? What would she say? Your father is a billionaire who didn't want us. No child deserved to carry that weight. Naomi convinced herself she'd made the right choice. She convinced herself that they were better off without Daniel, that the life she'd built for Elijah was enough. But fate, it turns out, has a cruel sense of humor. 3 years ago, Naomi received a call that would shatter her carefully constructed peace. A tech firm was recruiting her for a senior marketing position. Better pay, better title, the kind of opportunity she couldn't turn down. The job came with one caveat: she'd be expected to attend high-profile events, network with potential clients, represent the company at galas and conferences. Naomi almost said no. She'd worked so hard to stay invisible, to avoid the circles where Daniel Harrington traveled. But the money was too good, and Elijah was getting older. He'd need college funds, opportunities she couldn't provide on her current salary. She accepted the job. The first major event was a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, one of those glittering affairs where Manhattan's elite gathered to write checks and see who wore what designer. Naomi wore a simple black dress, her natural hair styled in elegant curls that framed her face. She told herself she could blend into the crowd, make polite conversation, and leave early. She was standing near the bar, nursing a glass of wine and checking her watch, when she felt it, that electric awareness that makes the hair on your neck stand up. She turned slowly, already knowing what she would see. Daniel Harrington stood across the ballroom, and for a moment, time collapsed. He looked older. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, a weariness in his expression despite the expensive tuxedo. But he was still devastating. Still magnetic. Still the man who had broken her heart and given her the greatest gift of her life without ever knowing it. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Naomi watched the recognition hit him like a physical blow. His conversation stopped mid-sentence. His champagne glass paused halfway to his lips. She turned to leave. This was a mistake she needed to get out. But before she could take 2 steps, his voice cut through the noise of the gala. Naomi. She froze. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking, to disappear back into the crowd. But years of professional training kicked in. She couldn't cause a scene. She couldn't run. So she turned back around and faced the man who had haunted her dreams for 5 years. Daniel crossed the ballroom like the crowd didn't exist, his eyes never leaving hers. When he reached her, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Naomi Carter, he said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite identify. I can't believe it's really you. Daniel, she managed, proud that her voice didn't shake. It's been a long time. 6 years, he said immediately, and the fact that he knew exactly how long gutted her. I looked for you. After I got back from Europe, I tried to find you. You just vanished. Naomi's carefully constructed walls began to crack. I got a new job. Moved. You know how it is. No, Daniel said, his voice dropping lower, more intense. I don't know how it is. We had something real, Naomi. And then you disappeared like I meant nothing to you. The audacity of that statement nearly made her laugh. Like she had been the one to abandon him? But before she could respond, Daniel continued. My father told me you took the money and left. That you'd signed an NDA and wanted nothing to do with me. But I never believed him. I searched for you for months, Naomi. I hired investigators. I called everyone we knew. You just vanished. The words hit Naomi like a freight train. Richard had lied. To both of them. Daniel hadn't known about the threats, hadn't chosen to leave her. His father had orchestrated everything, played them both like pieces on a chessboard. Your father gave me no choice, Naomi said quietly, years of buried anger rising to the surface. He threatened my mother's job. He threatened to ruin my career before it started. And you were already gone, off to Europe without even a text message goodbye. What was I supposed to think? Daniel's face went pale. He told me there was an emergency acquisition in London. That I had to leave immediately. When I tried to call you from the airport, your number was disconnected. Naomi, I swear I didn't know. It doesn't matter, Naomi interrupted, even though every cell in her body was screaming that it mattered more than anything. It was 6 years ago. We've both moved on. But they hadn't moved on. Not really. That became clear over the next hour as they stood in that ballroom, talking like no time had passed at all. Daniel told her about the years after she left, how he'd thrown himself into work, how every relationship since had felt hollow, how he'd never stopped wondering what might have been. Naomi found herself sharing carefully edited pieces of her own life, her career success, her small apartment, her focus on building something stable. She didn't mention Elijah. She told herself it was because it wasn't the right time, because they were at a public event, because her son's existence wasn't something you just casually mentioned to the father who didn't know he existed. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. She was already falling for Daniel Harrington all over again, and she didn't know how to stop it. Over the following months, Daniel courted her properly. Not stolen moments in secret this time, but real dates. Dinner at restaurants where he didn't hide her away in private rooms. Walks through Central Park where he held her hand in public. Weekend trips where he asked about her dreams, her goals, her life. He was different now, more mature, more aware of the privilege he'd been born into. He listened when she talked about growing up poor, about her mother's struggles, about clawing her way out of Brooklyn. He didn't try to solve her problems with money or dismiss her experiences. He just listened. Naomi's walls crumbled piece by piece. She told herself she was being smart this time, protecting her heart, keeping Elijah separate from this relationship until she knew it was real. Her son stayed with his nanny during her dates with Daniel, spent weekends at a friend's house when Daniel whisked her away for romantic getaways. It was a juggling act that required constant lies, work trips, and family obligations that Daniel never questioned. He trusted her completely, and that trust felt like acid in Naomi's gut every time she looked at Elijah's face and saw Daniel's eyes staring back at her. But she convinced herself she'd tell him. Soon. When the time was right. When she was sure Daniel wouldn't disappear again, wouldn't let his father poison their relationship, wouldn't decide that a ready-made family was too complicated for a billionaire CEO. A year after that gala reunion, Daniel proposed. They were on the rooftop of his penthouse, the city sprawling out beneath them in a tapestry of lights. Daniel got down on one knee and pulled out a ring that probably cost more than Naomi's entire apartment building. "Naomi Carter," he said, and his voice shook in a way she'd never heard before. "You're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm more than just my last name. You see me, the real me, and you love me anyway. I don't want to spend another day without you. Will you marry me?" Naomi should have said no. Should have stopped him right there and confessed everything. But when she looked into his eyes identical to their son's, and saw nothing but love and hope and genuine vulnerability, the word that came out of her mouth was, "Yes." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her like she was the only thing that mattered in his entire billion-dollar empire. And Naomi told herself she'd tell him about Elijah tomorrow. Or next week. Or next month. She'd find the right moment, the right words. She'd explain everything and he'd understand. She was running out of tomorrows. While Daniel and Naomi rebuilt their relationship in the light, someone else watched from the shadows. Someone who had expected to wear that engagement ring. Someone whose jealousy had curdled into something far more dangerous. Victoria Steele had been Daniel Harrington's girlfriend for 2 years before Naomi Carter re-entered his life. They'd met at a charity function, of course they had, and bonded over their shared world of old money and older expectations. Victoria was everything Daniel's social circle expected him to marry. Blonde, polished, descended from a family whose wealth predated the American Revolution. She'd been certain Daniel would propose. She'd already picked out her wedding dress, planned the guest list in her head, imagined herself as the wife of one of America's most powerful CEOs. And then Naomi Carter, a woman Victoria viewed as beneath them in every way that mattered, had waltzed back into Daniel's life and stolen everything Victoria considered hers. The breakup had been humiliating. Daniel had taken her to dinner at Le Bernardin and told her, with infuriating kindness, that his heart belonged to someone else. That he'd never stopped loving Naomi, that seeing her again had made him realize he'd been settling for comfort instead of passion. Victoria had smiled through the entire conversation, accepted his apology with grace, and walked out of that restaurant with her head held high. But inside, she was already planning her revenge. She hired the best private investigators money could buy, the kind who didn't ask questions about ethics or legality. Within 3 weeks, they'd uncovered something explosive. Naomi Carter had a 5-year-old son named Elijah. A boy whose birth certificate listed no father. A boy whose age corresponded suspiciously with the timeline of Naomi's previous relationship with Daniel. Victoria studied the photographs her investigators provided. The child had curly hair and, in certain lighting, eyes that looked remarkably blue. Could it be possible? Had Naomi been hiding Daniel's son from him for 5 years? Another woman might have gone straight to Daniel with this information. But Victoria was patient. She understood that timing was everything. Revealing Naomi's secret too early would make Victoria look petty and jealous. No, she needed to wait for the perfect moment, a moment when the revelation would cause maximum damage, when it would destroy not just Naomi's relationship with Daniel, but her entire life. So Victoria waited. She watched. She collected evidence. And she bided her time. Meanwhile, Naomi lived a double life that was slowly tearing her apart. By day, she was Daniel's elegant fiancée, attending board meetings where billion-dollar decisions were made, hosting dinner parties for his business associates, being photographed at charity galas for society pages. She played the role perfectly, dressed in designer clothes Daniel insisted on buying her, smiled for cameras, made small talk with people whose yearly shoe budget exceeded her childhood household income. But every night, Naomi returned to her apartment across town, the modest two-bedroom she'd refused to give up despite Daniel's offers to move her into his estate. There, Elijah waited with Maria, the nanny who'd become family over the years. And there, Naomi could breathe. Elijah was 5 years old now, brilliant and curious, and full of questions Naomi couldn't always answer. "Why don't we live in a big house like my friend Tyler?" he'd ask. "Why can't I meet your fancy friends? Why do you cry sometimes when you look at me?" That last question had broken Naomi's heart. She hadn't realized her son noticed those moments when she'd look at his face, at Daniel's eyes staring back at her, and feel the weight of her lies crushing down. "Mommy just loves you so much it makes her emotional," she'd say, pulling him close. And it was true. Every decision she'd made, every lie she'd told, had been to protect this beautiful boy from a world that might reject him, from a father who might not want him, from a life that could destroy him. But the lies were getting harder to maintain. Daniel was planning their wedding, talking about the future, asking about children. "I can't wait to start a family with you," he'd say, completely oblivious to the fact that they already had one. Naomi told herself she'd tell him after the wedding. Or maybe before the wedding. Or maybe, God help her, she'd just keep both worlds separate forever somehow. It was an impossible dream, and deep down she knew it. The walls were closing in. It was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. The night it all fell apart started like any other lie. Daniel's business trip to Singapore was supposed to last a week. He was finalizing a merger that would expand Harrington Global into Southeast Asian markets, the kind of deal that required his personal attention, multiple meetings, strategic dinners with executives who expected the CEO himself to court them. Naomi had breathed a sigh of relief when he left. A full week where she didn't have to juggle schedules, where she could just be Elijah's mom without the constant anxiety of keeping her two worlds separate. She'd planned movie nights and trips to the park, quality time that didn't require her to check her phone every 5 minutes in case Daniel called unexpectedly. On the third night of Daniel's trip, Naomi made a decision that would prove catastrophic. Elijah had been asking to see the big house, Daniel's estate, ever since Naomi had mentioned she'd been spending time there. In her son's 5-year-old mind, it sounded like a palace from his storybooks. "Please, Mommy," Elijah begged. "Just to see it? We don't have to stay long." Naomi knew it was risky. But Daniel was halfway around the world. His security staff had been given the week off since no one would be at the estate. It would just be a quick visit, let Elijah see the house, run around the grounds, satisfy his curiosity. They'd be in and out before anyone knew. What Naomi didn't know was that Daniel's merger had closed faster than expected. The executives he'd been courting had reviewed the terms ahead of schedule and signed that afternoon. Daniel had immediately booked a flight home, eager to surprise his fiancée, to celebrate the deal with the woman he loved. He didn't text ahead. He wanted it to be a surprise. Naomi and Elijah arrived at the estate just after sunset. The property looked like something from a dream or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. Walls of glass reflected the city lights, turning the mansion into a glowing beacon of wealth and power. Manicured lawns stretched out in every direction, illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. "Whoa," Elijah breathed, his eyes wide. This is where you go, Mommy. Sometimes, Naomi said, her heart already pounding with anxiety. Come on, let's make this quick. She used her key to let them in. Daniel had given her full access months ago, trusting her completely. The interior was exactly as she'd left it. Marble floors so polished you could see your reflection, soaring ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Elijah ran ahead, his sneakers squeaking on the marble, laughing with delight at the echo. Naomi followed, her nerves on edge despite knowing Daniel was thousands of miles away. They ended up in the guest wing, the section Naomi had claimed as her office space when she needed to work from the estate. In reality, it was the one area where she'd allowed herself to leave traces of her real life. A few photos of Elijah tucked in a drawer, some of his artwork she couldn't bear to throw away. Tonight, she brought a bag of his toys, thinking they could spend an hour here and then head home. Elijah was playing with his action figures on the plush carpet, creating elaborate stories with the unself-conscious joy of a child who didn't understand how precarious their situation was. Naomi sat on the floor with him, trying to enjoy the moment, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. She pulled out her phone to check the time. They'd been there almost an hour, longer than planned. 5 more minutes, baby, she said. Then we need to head home. But Mommy, I want to see more of the house. Elijah protested. Another time, Naomi promised, a lie among so many others. That's when she heard it. The sound that made her blood turn to ice. A car door slamming in the circular driveway outside. Footsteps on the front walkway. The electronic beep of the security system being disarmed. Someone was home. No. No, no, no. This couldn't be happening. Daniel was in Singapore. He wasn't supposed to be back for 4 more days. Naomi's hands shook as she grabbed Elijah. Sweetheart, we need to go. Right now. But it was too late. The footsteps were already moving through the house, coming closer, coming toward them. Naomi's mind raced. She could try to slip out through the guest wing's exterior door, but Daniel would hear it. She could hide Elijah in a closet and pretend she'd been working alone, but her son would never understand, would probably cry out. Every option led to disaster. And then Daniel's voice echoed through the hallway, confused but not alarmed yet. Naomi? Are you here? I saw lights on. He appeared in the doorway before Naomi could form a plan, before she could even stand up. Daniel Harrington, her fiancé, the man she'd promised to marry, the man she'd been lying to for over a year. His eyes swept the scene before him, Naomi sitting on the floor, tears already forming because she knew what was about to happen. And Elijah, still playing with his toys, looking up at the stranger in the doorway with curiosity in his piercing blue eyes. Daniel froze. His briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. His face went pale, then flushed, then pale again as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. The resemblance was undeniable. Even if Naomi had wanted to deny it, even if she'd prepared some elaborate lie, the truth was written in every feature of Elijah's face. The curve of his jaw, the shade of his eyes, the shape of his smile. This wasn't just any child. This was his child. Daniel, Naomi's voice cracked as she struggled to stand, her legs shaking so badly she nearly fell. I can explain. But Daniel wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were locked on Elijah, who had stopped playing and was now clinging to his mother's leg, frightened by the intensity of the stranger's stare. Who is this? Daniel asked, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. The kind of calm that comes before a storm so violent it levels everything in its path. Naomi opened her mouth. Closed it. Years of rehearsed explanations evaporated. There were no words that could make this okay. No explanation that would erase what she'd done. His name is Elijah, she finally whispered. Daniel, he's your son. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even Elijah made a sound, sensing on some instinctive level that the adult's world had just shattered. Daniel staggered backward like he'd been physically struck. His hand reached out, found the doorframe, gripped it to keep himself upright. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with a mixture of emotions Naomi couldn't even begin to separate. My son. Each word seemed to cost him something. How long have you known? It wasn't really a question. The answer was obvious from Elijah's age, from the timeline, from everything. Daniel's mind was working through it all. The dates, the lies, the careful way Naomi had kept this part of her life hidden. Naomi couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't have the right to cry. Not when she was the one who'd caused this devastation. How long? Daniel repeated, and this time his voice cracked with rage and grief and betrayal. Since before he was born, Naomi whispered. Since I found out I was pregnant. Daniel, I wanted to tell you, but what? Daniel's voice rose, making Elijah whimper and bury his face against Naomi's stomach. But you decided to keep my son from me for 5 years? But you thought it was acceptable to let me believe we were building a future together while you were hiding the fact that we already had a child. Your father, Naomi started. Don't. Daniel held up a hand, and she could see it trembling. Don't you dare blame my father for this. Whatever he did 6 years ago, you had a year to tell me the truth. A year since we reconnected. A year since I proposed. A year of looking me in the eye and lying. He was right. God help her, he was absolutely right. Daniel turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing through the vast house. Naomi heard the front door slam. Heard his car start in the driveway. Heard the sound of her entire world collapsing. She sank to the floor, pulling Elijah into her arms as sobs racked her body. Her son held onto her, confused and scared. Mommy, who was that man? Elijah asked in a small voice. Why was he so mad? Naomi couldn't answer. She just held her son and cried for everything they'd just lost. Across the city, in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Victoria Steele's phone buzzed with a text from her investigator. Just 2 words, but they were enough to make her smile with vindictive satisfaction. He knows. 5 years of secrets had just exploded into the open. The perfect relationship between billionaire Daniel Harrington and his fiancée Naomi Carter had been revealed as a foundation built on lies. A hidden child. A desperate mother. A betrayed father. And somewhere in the wreckage, a 5-year-old boy with his father's eyes had just had his world turned upside down without understanding why. The question that hung in the air, unanswered and terrifying, was simple. Could love survive a betrayal this deep? Or had Naomi Carter just destroyed the only chance she'd ever have at a real family? So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Naomi was wrong to keep Elijah a secret from Daniel? Or was she just a mother trying to protect her son from a world that might reject him? Should Daniel forgive her, or is trust too broken to rebuild? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know what you think. And if you're still with me, if you've made it this far in the story, type the word betrayed in the comments so I know you're here for this emotional roller coaster. Because trust me, what happens next is going to test everything you think you know about love, forgiveness, and second chances. Daniel Harrington didn't come home that night, or the next night, or the night after that. He disappeared into a place even Naomi didn't know existed, a private penthouse in Lower Manhattan that he'd purchased years ago under a shell company. It was his sanctuary, the one place in the world where Daniel Harrington, the billionaire CEO, didn't exist. Just 4 walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and silence so complete it felt like being underwater. He sat in the dark with a crystal tumbler of whiskey that he kept refilling but never seemed to drain. The city lights stretched out before him like a glittering accusation, each one a reminder of the empire he'd built, the power he wielded, and the complete lack of control he had over his own life. 5 years. 5 years of his son's existence had been stolen from him. Daniel's mind replayed every moment with Naomi like security footage he couldn't stop reviewing. Every date. Every conversation. Every time she'd looked into his eyes and smiled. Had it all been a lie? Had she been laughing at him the whole time, playing the long game, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal her leverage? No. That didn't make sense. If Naomi had wanted money, she could have come to him years ago with paternity papers and demands. She could have sold the story to tabloids, could have destroyed his reputation and walked away with millions in settlements. But she hadn't done any of that. She'd kept the secret so carefully that even his investigators, and Daniel had the best money could buy, had never found a trace of the child. Why? What was she protecting? Or was she just protecting herself? The rage simmered beneath Daniel's carefully controlled exterior like magma beneath a glacier. He wanted to scream. Wanted to throw the whiskey glass through those pristine windows. Wanted to call Naomi and demand answers to questions he couldn't even formulate yet. But beneath the rage was something that hurt far worse. Grief. He had a son. A 5-year-old boy with his eyes who existed in the world without knowing his father. What were his first words? When did he take his first steps? What made him laugh? What were his nightmares about? Did he play sports or prefer books? Was he shy or outgoing? Daniel knew none of it. And he should have. He should have been there for every scraped knee and bedtime story. He should have been the one teaching his son to ride a bike, to tie his shoes, to be brave when the world felt scary. All of it, stolen. His phone sat on the marble counter, screen lighting up every few minutes with notifications. 50 messages from Naomi. Then 70. Then 100. Daniel deleted them all without reading a single word. He couldn't. Not yet. If he read her excuses, her explanations, her justifications, he might do something he'd regret. Like forgive her before he was ready. Or never forgive her at all. Meanwhile, across the city in the Harrington estate that now felt like a mausoleum, Naomi Carter was falling apart in slow motion. She'd tried everything. Called Daniel's cell phone until her fingers cramped. Texted until her eyes blurred. She'd even driven to Harrington Global's headquarters, walked right up to the security desk in the lobby, and begged them to let her see him. The security guard, a man who'd always been polite to her before, who'd smiled and wished her good morning dozens of times, looked at her with something close to pity. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter. Mr. Harrington has left explicit instructions that you're not to be admitted to the building under any circumstances." The words hit like a physical blow. Naomi had stood there in the lobby, surrounded by marble and glass and the wealth Daniel commanded so effortlessly, and felt smaller than she'd ever felt in her life. Even smaller than when his father had threatened her all those years ago. She'd driven back to the estate, her key still worked at least, and collapsed in the guest wing where Daniel had discovered her secret. The toys were still scattered across the floor. Elijah's crayons. His action figures. Evidence of the life she'd tried to keep hidden. The engagement ring on her finger caught the light, and Naomi twisted it with trembling fingers. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever owned. A flawless diamond set in platinum, the kind of ring that probably cost more than most people's houses. Daniel had slipped it onto her finger a year ago with hands that shook with nervousness, with love, with hope for their future. Now it felt like a lie made solid. A promise that had been broken before it was ever spoken. Elijah didn't understand any of it, and that somehow made everything worse. "Mommy, where's the man from the big house?" he asked for the 10th time that day, his blue eyes, Daniel's eyes, wide with confusion. Naomi pulled her son onto her lap and held him close, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo. "He had to go away for work, baby." "Is he coming back?" The question cracked something inside Naomi's chest. "I don't know. Did I do something wrong?" Elijah's voice was so small, so scared. "Is he mad at me?" "No." Naomi gripped her son's shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. Do you understand me? You are perfect. You are loved. This is all. This is all Mommy's fault. And it was. God, it was. Naomi had made choice after choice after choice, each one seeming justified in the moment, each one digging her deeper into a hole she could never climb out of. She'd told herself she was protecting Elijah. Protecting herself. Protecting the fragile second chance she'd been given with Daniel. But all she'd really done was build a house of cards and then act surprised when it collapsed. While Daniel grieved in isolation and Naomi drowned in guilt, Victoria Steele made her move with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. She'd been planning this moment for months, gathering ammunition, positioning her pieces on the board. Now it was time to strike, and Victoria never missed. She called an emergency board meeting at Harrington Global, using connections her family had cultivated over generations. The Steele name still carried weight in these circles, even if her fortune was built on foundations more fragile than anyone knew. The board members gathered in the executive conference room on the 52nd floor, confused but intrigued. Emergency meetings were rare. Whatever Victoria Steele wanted to discuss must be significant. Victoria stood at the head of the table dressed in a tailored white suit that screamed power and innocence in equal measure. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman born into privilege who knew how to wield it like a weapon. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I wouldn't have called this meeting if the matter wasn't urgent and directly relevant to the future of Harrington Global." Gerald Frost, one of the oldest board members and a man who'd been friends with Daniel's father, leaned back in his leather chair. "This better be good, Victoria. We don't appreciate theatrics." Victoria's smile was ice. "I assure you, this is no theatrics. I've discovered information about our CEO's personal life that raises serious questions about his judgment, both personally and professionally." The room went quiet. Corporate boards loved gossip almost as much as they loved profit margins. "Daniel Harrington," Victoria continued, pulling up a presentation on the massive screen behind her, "has a 5-year-old illegitimate son with his current fiancée, Naomi Carter." Photos appeared on the screen. Elijah at the park, Elijah with Naomi, Elijah in front of Naomi's modest apartment building. Victoria's investigators had been thorough. "Miss Carter hid this child's existence from Daniel for half a decade," Victoria said, letting that sink in. "She deceived him completely. Made him believe they were building a future together while concealing the fact that they already had a past, and a child." Murmurs rippled around the table. One board member, a woman named Patricia Chun, frowned. "With all due respect, Victoria, why are we discussing Daniel's personal life? This seems like a matter between him and his fiancée." "Does it?" Victoria's eyes glittered. "Think about what this reveals about Daniel's judgment. If he can be so easily deceived in his personal life, deceived for years by the woman he planned to marry, what does that say about his ability to lead this company? What does it say about his capacity to identify threats, to read people, to make sound decisions?" The seed of doubt landed exactly where Victoria intended. Gerald Frost leaned forward, his expression troubled. "Where is Daniel now? Does he know about this child?" Victoria's smile widened. "He discovered the truth 3 days ago. And since then, he's been completely unreachable. No one knows where he is. He's not responding to calls or emails. He's essentially abandoned his post during a critical quarter." More murmurs. Louder this time. Victoria could see the worry spreading like an infection. "I'm not suggesting we take any drastic action," Victoria said, her tone reasonable and concerned. "But I think we need to seriously consider whether Daniel Harrington is in the right mental and emotional state to lead this company. Perhaps a temporary leave of absence while he sorts out his personal affairs? With appropriate oversight, of course." "And who would you suggest provide this oversight?" Patricia asked dryly. Victoria's smile never wavered. "I'm merely bringing concerns to the board's attention. Whatever you decide is, of course, your decision. But the damage was done. Victoria could see it in their faces. The doubt, the concern, the calculations about what this scandal could do to stock prices and public perception. She'd planted the seeds of Daniel's downfall, and all she had to do now was water them and watch them grow. The meeting adjourned with no formal decisions made, but Victoria knew that didn't matter. The whispers had started. The questions had been raised. Daniel's position was no longer as secure as it had been, and Victoria Steele had just positioned herself perfectly to catch him when he fell. Back in her apartment across town, Naomi Carter stared at the mountain of legal documents her lawyer had recommended she review. Custody agreements, paternity test procedures, court filing protocols. All of it felt surreal, like she was reading about someone else's life instead of her own. The press had somehow gotten wind of the story, probably Victoria's doing, and now paparazzi camped outside her building day and night. They shouted questions every time she tried to leave. Miss Carter, is it true you hid Daniel Harrington's son from him? Naomi, how long were you planning to keep the secret? Is this about money? Are you looking for a payout? Each question was a knife between her ribs. Naomi had hired a lawyer, not to fight Daniel, because she didn't want to fight him. She wanted to protect Elijah from becoming collateral damage in whatever war was about to erupt. But she also needed to make Daniel understand. She needed him to know that her choices, however misguided, had come from fear and pain, not malice or greed. So she wrote him a letter. 15 pages, handwritten, tears smudging the ink in places. Naomi poured everything onto those pages. The terror she'd felt when his father threatened her, the loneliness of raising Elijah alone, the constant fear that she wasn't enough. She wrote about the moment Daniel came back into her life and how she'd wanted so desperately to tell him about their son, but couldn't find the words. She wrote about loving him so much it physically hurt and being so afraid of losing him again that she'd made the worst decision of her life. She wrote, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I destroyed your trust in the worst way possible. But please believe me when I say that every choice I made was because I was terrified. Terrified of losing you, terrified of Elijah getting hurt, terrified of not being enough for either of you. I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have trusted us. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting that I didn't." Naomi sealed the letter in an envelope and took it to Harrington Global, knowing she couldn't get past security herself. But Daniel's assistant, Claire, had always been kind to her. Naomi found Claire in the lobby during her lunch break. "Please," Naomi begged, pressing the envelope into Claire's hands. "I know he doesn't want to see me. I know he probably never wants to hear from me again. But please just make sure he reads this. That's all I'm asking." Claire looked at the envelope, then at Naomi's tear-stained face. "I'll make sure he gets it," she promised. Naomi left feeling like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance Daniel would understand. What Naomi didn't know was that Claire's supervisor, a man who'd been on Victoria Steele's payroll for months, was watching the exchange from across the lobby. The moment Naomi left, he approached Claire with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What did Miss Carter give you?" Claire hesitated. "Just a letter for Mr. Harrington." "I'll make sure he gets it," the supervisor said, holding out his hand. "Given the circumstances, it's probably best if I deliver it personally." Claire knew something felt wrong, but she was just an assistant. She couldn't refuse a direct order from upper management. Reluctantly, she handed over the envelope. The supervisor took it straight to Victoria Steele. Victoria read every word of Naomi's letter in her penthouse apartment, a glass of champagne in hand. She read about Naomi's fear and pain and desperate love. She read the apologies and the explanations and the heartbreak bleeding through every sentence. And then she fed the entire letter through her paper shredder, watching 15 pages of truth turn into confetti. Daniel never received Naomi's words. He would never know she'd tried to explain. That gap in communication, that missing piece of understanding, would nearly destroy everything. 1 week after Daniel discovered his son's existence, Naomi received a courier delivery that made her blood turn to ice. Legal documents. Official. Stamped by the New York Superior Court. Petition for full custody and paternity testing. Naomi's hands shook so badly she dropped the papers twice before she managed to read them. The language was brutal, clinical, devastating. Daniel's lawyers had painted her as a manipulative liar who had willfully and maliciously deprived a father of his child. They cited her pattern of deception spanning multiple years. They questioned her fitness as a parent, suggesting that someone capable of such sustained dishonesty couldn't be trusted to make sound decisions about a child's welfare. They wanted Elijah. They wanted to take her son away. Naomi collapsed on her kitchen floor, papers scattering around her like leaves. Her chest constricted so tightly she couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Daniel wouldn't do this. He was angry, yes. Hurt, yes. But he wouldn't try to take Elijah away from her. He wouldn't. Except the documents in front of her said otherwise. Her phone rang. Her lawyer, Jennifer Rodriguez, had already seen the filing. It was public record now. Naomi, we need to talk. Now. Jennifer's voice was grim. This is serious. Harrington has unlimited resources. If he wants a custody battle, he can bury you in litigation for years. We're talking teams of lawyers, expert witnesses, character assassination in court and in the press. We need to negotiate before this gets ugly. He won't even talk to me, Naomi sobbed into the phone. How can I negotiate with someone who won't speak to me? Then we prepare for war, Jennifer said quietly. I'm sorry, Naomi. But you need to understand what you're up against. Daniel Harrington can afford to drag this out indefinitely. Can you? The answer was obvious. Naomi had savings, but nothing compared to Billionaire resources. She could maybe afford 6 months of legal fees before she'd have to start selling everything she owned. After that, she'd be defenseless. He's going to take my son, Naomi whispered. Not if I can help it, Jennifer said fiercely. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the judge might order split custody. Or supervised visitation. The court's priority is what's best for Elijah, and a judge might decide that means having both parents actively involved in his life. Both parents. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a death sentence. Because both parents meant sharing Elijah with a man who currently hated her. It meant watching her son get into Daniel's car every other weekend and wondering if he'd come back. It meant lawyers and court dates and Elijah stuck in the middle of a war he didn't understand. Across town, Daniel sat in his lawyer's office, staring at an identical copy of the custody petition. His legal team had presented it to him like a battle plan, which in essence it was. We'll establish paternity first with a DNA test, his lead attorney, Marcus Webb, explained. That's non-negotiable and the court will absolutely grant it. Once paternity is confirmed, we move for custody. Given Miss Carter's documented pattern of deception, we have a strong case for questioning her judgment. What are our chances? Daniel asked, his voice hollow. Marcus exchanged glances with the other lawyers. Of getting full custody? Maybe 30%. More likely, the court will order joint custody with some kind of transition period. But we can push for primary custody based on your ability to provide stability, resources, education opportunities. And her ability to provide love, Daniel interrupted quietly. Which is what Elijah actually needs. The room went silent. Marcus cleared his throat. Mr. Harrington, I understand you're emotional about this situation. But we need to be strategic. Miss Carter lied to you for years. She kept your son from you. The court needs to see consequences for that behavior. Daniel picked up his pen. The petition sat in front of him, blank signature line waiting. This was his chance to fight back, to reclaim the years that had been stolen, to ensure he'd never be shut out of his son's life again. His hand hovered over the paper. Mr. Harrington? Marcus prompted. Daniel's jaw tightened. He signed his name with quick, angry strokes. "Get it done," he said. But as he walked out of the law office and back into the cold Manhattan afternoon, doubt crept in like fog. Was this really what he wanted? To go to war with the mother of his child? To force Elijah into the middle of a legal battle that would likely traumatize him more than Naomi's lies ever could? Daniel didn't know anymore. He didn't know anything except that he was furious and heartbroken and so goddamn tired of being manipulated by the people he loved. Everything changed when Claire could no longer stay silent. Daniel's assistant had watched the chaos unfold from her desk outside his office for 7 days. She'd seen Victoria Steele's smug smile when she left the emergency board meeting. She'd watched Naomi's letter get intercepted. She'd heard the whispers about Daniel's instability spreading through the executive floors like a virus. Claire had worked for Daniel Harrington for 4 years. She knew him to be demanding but fair, brilliant but occasionally blind to the politics swirling around him. And she knew in her bones, that he was being manipulated by people who didn't have his best interests at heart. So she requested a private meeting, knowing it could cost her job. Daniel barely looked up when she entered his penthouse office. He'd finally returned to Harrington Global, but he looked like hell, unshaven, exhausted, his suit rumpled in a way that was completely unlike him. "What is it, Claire?" "Mr. Harrington, I need to tell you something. And I need you to not interrupt until I'm finished." That got his attention. Claire never spoke to him like that. She told him everything. About Victoria intercepting Naomi's letter. About the emergency board meeting where Victoria had poisoned the well against him. About the rumors circulating that he was unfit to lead because of his personal drama. "Victoria Steele has been orchestrating this entire situation," Claire said, her hand shaking but her voice steady. "She's been planning to destroy you and Naomi since the day you proposed. And I have proof." She handed him a flash drive. "What's on this?" Daniel asked. "Security footage from the office building. From 5 years ago. The night your father met with Naomi." Daniel's blood went cold. "How did you get this?" "I've been here a long time, Mr. Harrington. I know where the archives are kept. I think you need to see what really happened that night." That evening, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse sanctuary and plugged in the flash drive. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Time-stamped from 5 years ago, showing the executive hallway of Harrington Global after business hours. He watched his father corner Naomi near the elevators. Watched him hand her an envelope. Watched Naomi's face crumble as she realized whatever was in that envelope meant the end of everything. She wasn't smiling. Wasn't triumphant. She looked devastated. The footage continued. Richard Harrington walked away and immediately pulled out his phone. Daniel couldn't hear the conversation, but he knew his father's body language well enough to read it. Richard was calling someone, speaking urgently, gesturing with his free hand the way he did when he was issuing orders. Daniel fast-forwarded through the archive footage and found the phone records Claire had somehow accessed. His father had called him that night, the call that had sent Daniel scrambling to the airport for the emergency acquisition in London that had turned out to be completely fabricated. The truth crashed down like a building collapsing. His father had orchestrated everything. The payoff. The lies. The separation. Richard had told Daniel that Naomi had taken the money gladly, that she was just another gold digger looking for a payday. But the footage showed something entirely different. A young woman heartbroken and terrified, alone in a hallway after the man she loved had been ripped away from her. Daniel's hands shook as he watched the video again. And again. Each time, he saw more details he'd missed. The way Naomi had leaned against the wall after his father left, like her legs wouldn't hold her. The way she'd clutched that envelope like it burned. The way she'd eventually straightened her shoulders and walked to the elevator with her head high, even though tears were streaming down her face. That wasn't a gold digger who'd gotten what she wanted. That was a woman who'd just had her heart broken by forces beyond her control. And then she discovered she was pregnant. Daniel tried to imagine it, Naomi alone, terrified, carrying his child while believing he'd abandoned her without a word. What would he have done in her position? Would he have tried to contact the man whose father had threatened him, knowing that same father had unlimited resources to destroy him? Would he have trusted that love could overcome money and power and family dynasties? Or would he have done exactly what Naomi did, disappeared, built a life for his child, and tried to survive? For the first time since he discovered Elijah's existence, Daniel considered that maybe Naomi's lies hadn't been about malice. Maybe they'd been about survival. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. Claire had given him one more piece of information, Naomi's address. Not the estate where she had a key, but her real apartment. The place where she'd raised their son for 5 years. Daniel grabbed his coat and headed for the door. So here's what I need to know from you. Do you think Daniel should forgive Naomi? Or is the trust too broken? Should he walk away and just focus on being a co-parent, or should he fight for the relationship they once had? Drop your thoughts in the comments because part 2 is going to blow your mind, and I want to know where you stand before we continue this journey. If you made it this far, if you're invested in seeing how Daniel and Naomi's story ends, type truth in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because part 2 drops soon and you do not want to miss what happens when Daniel and Naomi finally sit down and face everything they've been running from. This is Mr. Harrington Stories, and I'll see you in part 2.